Welcome. Welcome to the Anxiety Crusher series. So I go live every weekday from 8 a.m. Pacific time, and usually for 30 to 45 minutes. It'll get shorter, and then as people start joining in, it'll expand out again as we actually do group coaching and work through real world situations. So the 7-step reset is what I'm talking about. Now the 7-step reset is actually my transformation model. It's a coaching model I use to help people in the transformation program. Because what happens, we work through 7 performance areas and people get stuck, right? Everybody has a weak link somewhere. And this is not about working on our weaknesses. It's about making sure our weaknesses aren't hurting us. So we have to get things up to a baseline. And those 7 performance areas are mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And the emotional is the gateway to what I call the right side. And the right side would be your relationships, professional and financial. Too often people start with, I want this relationship, or I want this career, or I want this much money, which can lead to skipping the hard work, skipping the inner work. So what I would argue is that you have to change your identity to match your quest, or at least get on the on-ramp to getting your identity aligned with your quest. Or you're going to run into some problems and frustrations. This is where people give up. Some people turn to quote-unquote corruption and other things. But what we do at the 7-step reset is we give you a process, a procedure to change your habits. Too many people believe habits can't be changed. I even know people who are in the business of helping people who don't believe that they can change their habits. It's not something that they're probably overtly aware of. It's just that they accept the fact that what they have is what they're going to have to live with. But neuroplasticity tells us the brain we're born with does not have to be the brain that we die with. In fact, it's not the brain that we die with. It's just that it changes slowly over time. And because we're driven by habit, 95% of our lives are by habit, especially I would say after the early 30s. And that's because the prefrontal cortex is formed around age 27. And with that prefrontal cortex comes our final 20 billion neurons. There's 100 billion neurons. The last 20 billion that get formed during the prefrontal cortex, and that's from about 19 to 27. I like to say that's forming our model of the world. That's solidifying our model of the world. But what's interesting about that is there's an abundance of neurotransmitter available. There's an abundance of myelin available. And myelin and synapses, neurotransmitters, work together to create habits. So habits are more easily formed in our 20s than they are in our 30s and 40s. And also willpower is more available to us in our 20s than it is in our 30s and 40s. So what worked in our 20s, it could be frustrating in our 30s and 40s. If you ever watch teenagers working on skateboard tricks, it's like over and over. There's no emotion with it. They don't get sad. If they get a good one, yeah, maybe, but they're in it. They know that they have to just keep doing this and eventually will come. Up until about 27, all you have to do is show up. You show up, you get better. And then what happens in our 30s, we show up and we don't get better automatically. Then we start doing the work and we don't get better. And this is this is my point of view, is that people end up giving up and just accepting that what they have is it. Now, that's understandable, right? Because neuroscience is in its infancy. So this idea of neurons and neuroplasticity and myelination and synapses and neurotransmitter, all of this is relatively new in the context of a 10,000-year-old plus brain, right? You could argue the brain is over 100,000 years old, but 10,000 is a good number for how long we've been hunter-gatherers, and a lot of neuroscience makes sense when you look at it through a hunter-gatherer lens. Now, what I have is the 7-step reset. If you can look back, because I've been going live every weekday now for about 2 weeks, so you can find the previous live events down below on whatever platform you're on. And also you can go to 7stepreset.com/live. I'll put that in the chat. At the 7stepreset.com/live, you'll find other information. You'll find resources. I have some infographics out there. You'll find last week's, the last video or the last live event, so that would be Fridays. And then this one is running right now on that landing page, and then it will move over to previous, and the new event will take the place of the next event slot. And below that, you'll have different videos for the 7 steps. Eventually, I'll have all 7 steps out there, but I just started going through one step for the entire day or that event, 1 step per event. I started doing that. So I now have the ability to put I'll have 8 of them. One is an overview, and then I'll have 8 steps. So you'll be able to catch up and see what's going on. And then the next thing I would recommend is test this stuff out for yourself. Work it out for yourself. Google the things, and then when you have questions about it, trying to teach it someone else, for example, will raise questions, and then come online and we'll talk about it. So I'm putting a link in there right now where you can join me on stage. This does change each time, but you can get that link from that landing page, 7stepreset.com/live. Today I'm talking about the first step and the first item in the first step. So the first step is beliefs. I'm sorry, the first step is beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, and mindset. And then I put physiology in the middle. So this first step is what I would call, that's who we are. That's where we are at any given time. It's like personal development. If you're working on personal development, this first step is where that focus is. And I can come in at any place on here and impact where a person is in terms of their beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology. So they're very, very interdependent. If I change physiology, a person may not be able to access beliefs that have to do with courage. If I get them into a depressed kind of physiological state, it could impact their beliefs. It impacts their neuroplasticity. It primes them for defeat rather than winning. And it can move them into a fixed mindset. And I can say that about each one of those. You get a fixed mindset, it'll change your physiology. Get into a fixed mindset, you can't access your beliefs that you can do something. You talk to a person with a fixed mindset, and they might say, I've tried everything, nothing works. They're stuck. And what we have to do is recognize where we are in that. So that's step 1, and this is ongoing. Now, although I talk about the day that we have 33,000 stimulus response cycles per day, we may not do step 1 33,000 times. Step 1 could be just an ongoing state throughout the day, but here's what happens. If a person gets triggered or they get into a funk, something happens, like I said, you hit one of these areas, they could drop. So you could be going along, let's say that you have a meter and you're going along throughout your day, and you wake up and your meter, you're at 85%, which is okay, and moving along, and then something bad happens and you get knocked down to a 60% in step 1. See, this is what I'm looking at in step 1. We want to be at some level, I would say 85% or above on a scale of 100. Obviously, we get down into the 20%. We need to do something, and this shows up in step 2. So step 2 is sort of looking at this dashboard. Where am I, and what can I do? Because there are things that we can do to change beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, physiology, mindset instantly. And then there are also things that we can do to change it over time, to build it, so to make it a habit. And step 2 gets into taking a quick look to see where we are and then making that adjustment. So today I'm going to talk about beliefs. Tomorrow I'll talk about neuroplasticity. The next day I'll talk about priming. And then we'll go mindset, and Friday physiology. Each step, 1 through 7, has many, many levers, easily a dozen. Most have more than a dozen levers. And for example, in the first step, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology, has levers, multiple levers for each one of those nodes on there. And the idea is you find a few levers that work for you, both on the long term and in the moment, and then use them. You don't need dozens of levers to make this work. You need 1 or 2 that you're going to use to develop yourself and get stronger mentally, physically, emotionally. And then you'll have another lever or 2 that gets you back to a growth mindset, for example, instantaneously, or back to a positive physiology. So you can use an anchor or something like that. In talking about beliefs, now I talk about this, the 7-step reset is from my transformation series, but I'm applying it to anxiety because anxiety is one of those things that can become habitual or habit of thought, habitual thought pattern. And to change that anxiety, you go through a similar process that we go through in changing in transformation. So if we have our comfort zone, we think about this comfort zone, we go up and down, and then we have an area that's below, and we don't want to go here, right? This is what we fear. And as we get closer to this, we may feel anxiety because this is scary down here. This is what we don't want. This is bad. And it's deeply conditioned. But people don't realize we also have a barrier on the upper side. And this is also scary. Not scary because it's dangerous, but it's unfamiliar. And that lack of familiarity makes it fear, turns it into like fear, because the subconscious looks at the unfamiliar as a threat. So this area up here becomes a threat. And what we have then is in this zone, over time we learn, and there are beliefs that stop us from crossing that area. So the context is, if we're going up and down, up and down, up and down, and we want to break out, in order to break out, we have to go through this barrier. And this barrier takes time. But once we break out, we have a new problem. We have more unfamiliarity. We have more of the unfamiliar. We have more threats. We have unknowns. We have VUCA. We have shiny things. There's all sorts of stuff up here. And so there's two skills that you need. One is to get through this barrier, and the other one is to continue on this trajectory once you're above the line. Now, beliefs, and you can, once a person is aware of a limiting belief, it's not that difficult to change it, unless it's a deep-seated belief that has a lot of connections to it. But a simple model for looking at beliefs is, if you think about beliefs as this as this graphic here, and over time we add things onto this belief. We start stacking things onto that belief, whether it's a political belief, maybe a religious belief, maybe it's a belief about what's available to you. Things get stacked on there. You make decisions based on that. Where you live may be based on those beliefs. Your job, those things. But now let's say that that is not just a disc or an oval, it's a tabletop. So what we want to do is look at what are the references. So the legs of this table are the references. And if you have trouble neutralizing a limiting belief, what you can do is look at the references. How did you get that belief? When was the first time you experienced it? Who was around you that was helping you internalize that belief? What are some of the references that were there? And as you go through that thought process, you can recognize that, oh, these references no longer apply, or they didn't apply then, or it's misinformation. The challenge is not so much neutralizing the belief by looking at the references. The challenge is recognizing that the belief exists. Because, one, in order to challenge it, you have to go through this barrier, and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens in here. We're in a comfort zone. The biggest obstacle to habit change is habit itself. So in order to change your belief, you've got to be able to have a habit pattern that allows you to do that. And that's what's hard. So we use what's called the movie theater technique. In the movie theater technique, you have a movie theater. Here's a screen. Okay, so you have a screen, and then you have yourself here watching the screen, and you are on the screen from childhood. And then what we're going to do, so this is person one, this is you number two, and then we're going to have in the projection booth another person, and they're watching you are watching yourself watch yourself on the screen. The reason we do this double dissociated step is that the reason we do the double dissociated step is because I'm struggling with this. It's not showing up well. By moving yourself to the projection booth, watching yourself watch yourself, and then you're on the screen, and what's on the screen is going back and coming through your childhood and going back to the first time you remember having that belief. When's the first time that belief showed up for you? And then asking yourself those questions. So if you just go directly at it and say, why do I have this belief, or where did I get this belief, you're going to go into the same habitual loop that you've always gone into, because it's a belief and your subconscious is going to defend the belief, because beliefs are assumed to be there to help you, to keep you safe. And so there's going to be resistance, but remember, the subconscious is a network of neurons. It's not a mind, it's not you, it's a network of neurons that doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. It doesn't know the difference between what's really your goals and your desires and your life vision versus what you learn from 0 to 7. It's all in that conditioned behavior. And so we do this double step. And once you do that, then you can use tools like, more easily use tools like reframe, questioning if you say I must or should. Acting. So, they say fake it till you make it. I'm not suggesting that, but I do say that acting yourself into a new way of feeling is much easier than feeling yourself into a new way of acting. Counter. Come up with a counter belief. So there's different techniques and different methodologies that you can use. I remember reading about Milton Erickson. He's a famous therapist from, I guess, the 50s and 60s. And when a person would come to him to lose weight, the first thing he would do is have them gain weight. And it was very confusing. But his point was he has to first get the person to believe that they can influence their weight. That he's working on their belief system. I came across this infographic, and what it does is it's talking about these. This is from a guy named Justin Meacham. Justin Meacham, and he's got a website, creatyl.com/newsletter. I guess is where you would find these. But I found it on LinkedIn, and it's not really a model, but he's showing that you have this doubt zone. And in this doubt zone, let's see if that's coming out. In this doubt zone, you have, it feels safe, it feels familiar, you stay stuck. And that's sort of what I was talking about. The unfamiliar becomes a threat. And then from the doubt zone, you go into the resistance zone. It says compare yourself to what you want. You tend to overthink moves, or you compare yourself to others. You start to overthink what you're planning to do. You listen to critics. You fear that you might look foolish. So there's this resistance, and then the skill stacking zone, and then the belief zone. So what I'm suggesting is that you can get to this belief zone quickly by acting as if you were already there, but part of it is neutralizing those beliefs that are stopping you. And then when you come back to this image, you'll still have the unpeeling of the onion that happens as you go through there, because you'll have new levels of that belief. Let's say you neutralize the belief, but as you start working through here, you'll get new levels of this belief coming up that you'll have to work through again. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that occurs in this space, and it can often send people back down here. This is why transformation is so difficult. I would say this is much more difficult than staying above the line, and many people never cross that line. They'll just never go up there. Another thing I would put here is change your language. And language is a good way for you to see where your limiting beliefs are. So a couple of things that I would point out. One is you have to have a belief that you can change your habits. You have to believe that habit change is available to you. Somewhere, like I was saying, in the 30s, it's very easy to adopt this belief that you just can't change your habits. You've tried everything, nothing works. You got the willpower problem going on, and then there's something else happens. I don't want power kicks in. And the thing is that we tend to justify strong feelings. If you have a strong feeling about something, for example, I don't want power, and I don't want power, guess what? It gets triggered by your willpower. What is I don't want power? Let's say that when you were a kid, you had an experience that driving across a bridge is is dangerous. Who knows where you got that, right? So you have this idea that driving across a bridge is dangerous, but you want to go somewhere that's on the other side of the bridge. You want to go there, but there's a bridge that's required, and so you'll say, I don't want to go there, but you may not associate with the bridge. You may just decide that you don't like that place. We start to build a narrative around why we don't want to do that when it's really just because you're fearful of a bridge. So listening to your language and then going through this process of asking yourself, well, why did this happen? That's where that movie theater technique would be helpful, because you're not seeing the bridge issue, but you can uncover it by moving out into the projection booth. And I don't think I finished my thought. The reason why we do that is because we want to take you out of the associations. When you're in it, when you're asking yourself, your associations are kicking off, the neurons that fire together, wire together, and so you're just getting more and more and more and more of the same. By stepping out and going to the projection booth and watching yourself, you can get out of that habit pattern and you can look at more objectively. Another thing you may want to look at is life expectancy. So the life expectancy tables uh, will tell you that males, somewhere depending on which table you're looking at, but generally speaking, males have a life expectancy somewhere in the mid 70s, and then women are slightly above that. But almost every table I've seen is not yet at 80, and it's been climbing slowly. But that's the average, and it's the average from when a person is born. So if they take everybody who's born in 1950, and that group has a life expectancy of 75 years, everybody. So everyone who was born in 1950 doesn't make it to 20. Some of them make it to 20 but not to 30. Some to 30 but not to 40, et cetera, all the way up. So if you take that group at 50 and redid the table, you would see that the life expectancy of a 50-year-old of that same group would be more like 90. And now with this wasn't possible to do before, but now with enough artificial intelligence out there, you can actually Google that, say what is the adjusted life expectancy for a person who's 50 years old, and it's still kind of sketchy because you'll see different numbers. It depends on how they do the calculation. And also remember, life expectancy tables exist, at least in the mainstream, for life insurance. So we were using life expectancy tables for life insurance, and it made sense to use the 0 to 75 because it locked it in, and then insurance companies have a easier way of doing the actuarial calculations, and of course it serves the insurance company, the insurance industry as well. But when you start looking at your life design and what you're planning to do and your purpose, it makes sense to know, well, what's my real life expectancy or my adjusted life expectancy? And you can do that by, as I said, doing a search or using artificial intelligence to come up with those numbers. But again, a 50-year-old has an adjusted life expectancy somewhere in the early 90s, and the theory or the common thought is that by the time that person who's 50 today gets to 91 or 2 or 3, that life expectancy will be more like 104. So why am I bringing that up? If you listen to your language, you may have language that suggests you have bought into that 75-year-old life expectancy. You may say things like, well, yeah, this is the last car I'm going to buy, or yeah, I'm not going to, won't be getting any more of blah, blah, right? I'm not going to be bothered with a gym membership, after 75. You may already start thinking about it that way. Whether or not you're going to the dentist, whether or not you're taking care of different aspects of your health, if you start thinking about, well, I'm only going to be here till I'm 75, and you're otherwise healthy, then you could be shortchanging yourself big time. So that's another, I would definitely check that belief. I would also check your belief about what you feel in terms of habits. Now, tomorrow I'll be talking about neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is how we change habits. That's why I call it in the 4 steps, or the 5 5 factors in the first step, I call it neuroplasticity. I don't call it habits. The reason I call it neuroplasticity is because this is by taking command of neuroplasticity, understanding how myelin works, understanding how synaptogenesis works, understanding the role of the different neurotransmitters, glutamate and acetylcholine. Now, you don't have to understand all of that, but what we do want to do is understand, like I said, you don't have to know how the car is built, but you do have to understand how to drive the car to make this work. And tomorrow I'll go through some of the steps you can use. One of them would be deep practice. And then priming is a big one. I'll do that on Wednesday. So again, you can join me in these. I'm going to work to keep these down to about a half hour. And then as people come into the chat, we'll continue the conversation online with real world situations. And again, you can go out to 7stepreset.com/live to find previous events. All right.